All right. Hey, shalom, everybody. It is Thursday, October the 6th, 2022. Hope you're having a beautiful day, and I hope you've had a beautiful day. And as you head into the evening, good evening to my mom. I love you. Hope you're doing well. Buenos tardes. Buenas tardes to Elva. And good evening to Joshua and to Rachel in Ohio. Hope you're doing well. Praying for Jerry and Janet. Good. Hope you're doing well, Jerry and Janet. Praying for you, Janet. I know that Janet's been. If we can be praying for her, she's been dealing with some dizziness and some pain and discomfort. So if we could be praying for her, pray. Hello. Good evening to Ron and Amy and to Kelly Kenfield and to Kelly and Melody Woods. Hope you guys are doing well. And to Sonia and Margarita, and to the Eddies, to Lauren and Mike and David and Levi and Valor and Haven and Everett. And good evening to Elizabeth and Jesse, and to Barbara Callahan and Pastor and Sister Martinez. Hope you guys are doing well as well. And to Misty, good evening. All right, well, we are in, we're going to try to hit the whole chapter of Isaiah 23 today. Because it really is one complete thought, so it's very difficult to break it up into sections, and so this is the last of Isaiah's oracles and these words to the nations that begin in Isaiah 13 now through 23. So this is the final. This is the closing one. The title of today's Daily Manna is "Security Nets Will Fail. Only the Lord will endure." And so you'll see, I mean, there's so many different, the focus really is going to be on our dependency on the wealth of this world, our dependency on wealth. And it's such a focus. It's always this primary focus in our nation. When people talk about the economy and wealth, it becomes the driving factor behind the decisions that so many make. And so, these chapters, chapters 13, not just to 23, but, the chapters 13 all the way through 35 could be labeled as a subdivision in the book of Isaiah, called Lessons in Trust. The Lord's looking to show his people that there's basically this generation, it's foolish to trust in the nations, to look for your help elsewhere. And that's foolish, but wisdom is to trust the Lord. And so it all opens up. Why would you trust any of the nations instead of the Lord when all the nations are subject to him? Right? They answer to him. And ultimately, they're going to be needing to turn to him, to call on him. That's the goal, is not for you to trust in them, but for you to lead them to trust in him. You set the way. You're a light on a hill. I've got a map here. We're going to be looking at Tyre and Sidon today. An oracle. This last oracle is addressed to Tyre, and you'll see that it's right on the coast, just above Israel. And so over, it was a port coast. This was Phoenicia. Is this area that you see? Antonio, did you put the map up? Oh, it is. So you see Phoenicia there, which is present day like Lebanon. And so Tyre and Sidon were two main cities within Phoenicia. And then just south of that, there is Jerusalem, Israel. And if you look over, of course, in the Mediterranean Sea, you see Cyprus, which will be named in this oracle, in this word today. So just as the series began with Babylon, this last one now is addressed to Tyre, to the great Phoenician seaport that was located on the Mediterranean Sea. It's about 100 miles northwest of Jerusalem. And so Babylon, it opens up in chapter 13 talking about Babylon, right, which was this great commercial power in the east. And now Tyre is this great commercial power in the west. These Phoenicians in Tyre and Sidon were living where Lebanon is, and it was a dominant port city. They had so of course they've got the Mediterranean Sea, and then And then on in the east they have this mountain range. So traveling, trying to export things over those mountain ranges was much more challenging, and especially those mountain ranges were covered with cedars and with massive forests and trees, and so basically they became a seafaring nation, and they faced westward, and everything was focused on being able to transport things on ships. So they what they did is they had developed wherever possible around the coast of the Mediterranean basin. They had established ports and colonized where they could, and they became what later Spain. Spain. When Columbus sailed the ocean blue, Spain was this seafaring dominant nation. England, of course, the great Empire of England later becomes dominant because of their navy and because of their ruling the sea, as it were. And so, in the same way, this is how Phoenicia, Tyre, and Sidon had become amazingly wealthy because of their because of their merchants in trade. And so we see, and we're going to see this at the end, in the same way that Babylon, it opens with Babylon being representative. It closes really with Tyre being, while an actual place, also being representative of what we tend to trust in. And of course, we read about words concerning Tyre in other very famous words, in other words of the prophets in Zechariah 9. When we looked at Zechariah last year, but it says Tyre has built herself a fortress, Matzor, a stronghold, and heaped up silver like dust and fine gold like dirt in the streets. So this is, she had heaped up, she had piled up, had piles of silver and gold like people, like dust and dirt, so much, right? So there's a self-sufficiency, there's a wealth that's people are depending on. They look at Tyre and look at all that silver and gold. Look at the security there, right? And so here, but the Lord keeps coming with a word against Tyre. In Zechariah 9:4, it says, behold, verse 4 says, behold, the Lord will impoverish her, verse 4, and destroy her power on the sea, while she will be devoured by fire. And of course, the more famous word concerning Tyre is is where Ezekiel speaks of Tyre as the epitome of pride and of self-reliance and rejection of the Lord. And so you have the prince of Tyre, which would have to do with the ruler perhaps in this world, and then you have the king of Tyre, which speaks to the spiritual reality going on in the invisible. So we see in Ezekiel 28, and I'm going to read through this quickly because we have a lot to cover. The word of Adonai came to me, saying, Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre, thus says Adonai Elohim. So your heart is exalted, and you say, I am a god. I sit in the seat of the gods, in the heart of the seas. Yet you are human, not a god. Even if you set up your heart like the heart of a god. See, you are wiser than Daniel. No secret is hidden from you. Of course, Ezekiel is a prophet during the exile, right? So this is some 150 years after Isaiah. By your wisdom and by your understanding, you have made wealth for yourself, and you have gathered gold and silver into your treasuries. In your great skill, by your trade, you have increased your wealth, so your heart is exalted by your wealth. Therefore, thus says Adonai Elohim, because you have set up your heart like the heart of God, behold, I will bring strangers against you, the ruthless of the nations. They will draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom. They will defile your splendor. They will bring you down to the pit. You will die the death of those slain in the heart of the seas. Will you still say, I am a god before the one who slays you? right? Is that as the guy goes to take you out, are you going to be like, but I'm a god? Yet you are a man and not a god in the hand of those who pierce you. You will die the deaths of the uncircumcised at the hand of strangers, for I have spoken, declares the Lord. Follows up, of course, with the picture of how what we see in humanity in the Prince of Tyre is a reflection of what's happened in the invisible, and speaking of the king of Tyre, and this is a picture of the fall of Satan. Son of man, lift up a lament for the king of Tyre. Say to him, thus says Adonai Elohim, you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering, ruby, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald, your settings and your sockets and workmanship of gold. In the day you were created, they were prepared. You were an anointed guardian cherub. I placed you on the holy mountain of God. You walked among stones of fire. You were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. By the abundance of your trade, they filled you within with violence. So you have sinned. So I threw you out as a profane thing from the mountain of God. I made you vanish, guardian cherub, from among the stones of fire. Your heart was exalted because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. I threw you down to the earth. Before kings, I set you up as a spectacle. And so now, 150 years earlier, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Isaiah. And what you see is the power of this world, right? It's defined by wealth. Wealth is what's worshipped here. It's all about money. It's always all about wealth and money. And that's where people find their security, and that's where people find their strength, and that's that's what causes them to exult, and what causes them to crash and into depression. And so the Lord is coming and saying, continually saying, your dependence is to be on me. The burden of Tyre, verse 1, Isaiah 23. Wail, ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is destroyed. There is no house and no harbor. From the land of Cyprus, it was revealed to them. So I almost named, instead of no security nets, I almost named it no safe harbor. Tarshish, of course, is from Tarsus on the southwest coast of Spain, just west of Gibraltar. And the ships of Tarshish were the largest sort of class of merchant ships in the ancient world. But without Tyre, a lot of their trade would be lost. And so what you see here is at some point it says, there's no harbor for you, ships of Tarshish. There's no harbor for you to go there. You found out on your way, right? When you were in Cyprus, on that island of Cyprus, that you're at this intermediate stop in Cyprus, and you find out something's happened to the place where we were going. Tyre is destroyed. There's no home port there to return to. Verse 2 says, be still, damam, be still, be silent, inhabitants, dwellers of the coastland, you merchants of Sidon, your messengers crossing the sea. Right, so now you move to Phoenicia, to the seaside, to the coastland. And he says, be silent, be motionless, be still. Right? So in a place where there would have been a bustling activity, now there's nothing. This international port has come to a standstill. All business has come to a standstill. Verse 3 says, on many waters, the grain of Shihor, the harvest of the Nile, was her revenue, and a marketplace of nations. So Tyre's ships and Tarshish's ships would, because they're moving things around the known world, around the Mediterranean world, they would go basically from Egypt, Shihor in the Nile Delta. It's a synonym for the Nile. They would go, and of course Egypt was proverbially fertile. It was fertile land. It was the granary of the ancient world.
right? So they didn't have a lot of lumber there, but that was okay because Tyre could trade their lumber and could bring their lumber down to Egypt. And Egypt brought all, like, there was grain going to the known world. So now what happens? Now that the grain, which is the revenue for the marketplace of nations, right? The trade, the profit that is for all the nations, what happens now? You've trusted in Tyre, and Tyre, the thing you trusted, the thing that you thought was so dependable, this merchant class is gone. It says, verse 4 says, be ashamed, O Sidon, right? For the sea has spoken, the stronghold of the sea, or it could be the mighty one of the sea, saying, I have not writhed or given birth. I have not reared young men and brought up maidens. Right? So the silence of the busy port that we see in verse 3 is followed by disappointment. Right? And so when it says be ashamed, O Sidon, it's the sense of feeling not just embarrassment, but more of reaping shame, that all of your expectations that you've depended upon have come to nothing. Everything this was the source of your greatness, and now it's laid bare, and now you can't follow through. And so you have this picture now of the sea having the sea having spoken, and it says either the stronghold of the sea or the mighty one of the sea. So Sidon, which would have been dependent more so on Tyre, said, hey, your trust is misplaced because Tyre was dependent upon the sea. And the sea says, I got nothing for you. I've got nothing for you. I don't bring up young men and brought up young maidens, right? It's all gone. Verse 5, when the report reaches Egypt, they will be in anguish at the report about Tyre, right? So now the focus goes to Egypt. With the news of Tyre's fall comes as a shock, right? What's happened here? Because first of all, it would be the collapse of commerce, of this commercial alliance that they have with the Phoenician cities. And the bulk of the trade between Egypt and Phoenicia was by sea. So as soon as Tyre fell, all sea connections north of her would be cut off, and Egypt's commerce would dry up. And so then Egypt's got to go, oh man, if this has happened, then we're next. And then it says, verse 6 says, cross over to Tarshish. Wail, you inhabitants of the island. Verse 7, is this your jubilant city, whose antiquity is from long ago, whose feet have taken her to settle in far-off lands? Right? So that you go from the silence of this shattered city, and you have the sense of people being like, could this have actually happened to Tyre? How can this have happened to Tyre? Because she was so established. Her antiquity, she's been around for a long time. She's ancient of the ancients, whose antiquity is long ago. Your antiquity is from the days of antiquity. This has been an established, dependable, for as long as we've ever known. You could depend on the commerce, on the fleets of Tarshish through the ports of Tyre. And so now there's been a reversal. So now there's no rejoicing, right? Your city of revelry, your old city, your ancient city is gone. And so people are being told, you got to leave. Go, cross over to Tarshish. Go, you got time to leave. Time to go away. Now you're not going like you used to go to colonize, or you used to go to sell things, but now you're going just to escape. Then we come into verse 8, and as we go into this next section, the thing is, well, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Who's responsible for this fall of this ancient, influential city of Tyre? And Isaiah, by the word of the Lord, answers with complete confidence, this is the Lord, the God of Israel. Right? Here's the God of a small country, a country smaller than some counties in the United States, That, in fact, he's not the God of a small country. He is Lord of all the earth, of the universe. and he is Lord of mighty Tyre, and he will call her to account. And the instrument of God's choice is going to be the one he used against the northern kingdom, that he uses against Babylon, that he uses against Aram and Edom. At this point, it's going to be Assyria. And the offense is the same one, that somehow we are in control, that humanity can take care of itself. We don't need you, God. We'll make a tower for our own name. Verse 8 says, who planned this against Tyre? The crowning city, or the city that crowns, the city that does the crowning is the idea. This is the city that makes princes, right? It goes on. The crowning city, whose merchants were princes, whose traders were the honored, were the kavod, the glorious, the weighty of the earth, right? So here's the giver of crowns, or the crowning city, followed by your merchants are princes, right? Typically, merchant travelers were not people of great social status. They were common people scraping to make a living. But Tyre was so established that their merchants, I think of, if you compare sort of the cultures of ancient Britain to the United States, that Britain had a class structure with nobility. It's always interesting when you watch certain things within that old British culture, and even that if you were a nobleman, it was a shameful thing to work, right? Your status, if you got your hands dirty, it was a shameful thing, right? And in the United States, it's the opposite. If you just go out shooting and you don't actually work, and if you grow up in money but you don't actually work, there's shame here for that, right? This is a pull you up by your own bootstraps kind of country. And so Tyre would be more equivalent to the United States in that regard. It's based on wealth, not status. The status is rooted in wealth. Whatever old money people have here, it's not that old, right? It's about who worked hardest, and that's what's glorified. And then because of the wealth, you become princes. You go from it's rags to riches kind of thing. Well, that's the picture you have here. These merchants were princes whose traders were the weighty of the earth, right? They were now had built themselves. They were like crowned heads of state. And you see that with rich business people in the United States, that they're glorified because of how much money they've made, that then they become like princes. And so their sophistication was rooted in their riches. That was it. So he goes, well, who did this? How did this happen? Verse 9, the Lord Adonai Tsevaot has planned it. Why? To defile the pride of all glory, to shame all the glorified, all the honored of the earth, right? So this fall of Tyre is not just an accident of history. It's not merely the result of Assyria's overwhelming need to dominate. It's very clear in what the Lord gives Isaiah that God's purposes are being worked out in human affairs, right? Tyre is being destroyed not so that Israel may rule, but that the God of Israel would be glorified, right? God's purpose is to show the foolishness of human pride. God is acting to show that we get momentary glory. It's foolish to depend on that kind of glory. What the Lord opposes is the pride that seeks to make itself independent of him. I've got this. I don't need you. Right? And he opposes it not just because it somehow denies his own preeminence. Like, it's not like God's like offended, like, how dare you? But because it's false. It's a lie. And as long as you believe that you can live without God, as you won't trust in him, that you think you can do this, it's a destructive lie. and it leads others into destruction. I don't need you. I can do this on my own. Look what I can do. Look how great I am. Right? And then so people are in pursuit of that rather than in pursuit of him. And so he has to bring that down to reveal that this doesn't last, that this doesn't fulfill, this doesn't satisfy. Verse 10 says, overflow through your land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no restraint anymore. So the word overflow here is the Hebrew word ivri, which can mean to pass over, or it can mean to till. So this could be that Tarshish is now being told to cultivate its own land without being dominated by Tyre. In the NASV, they translate it as traverse. So it could be that now the people of Tarshish can pass through its vicinity as freely as the Nile passes through Egypt. You no longer have a harbor, though, right? There's no restraint anymore. The language there for restraint is it's a picture of a girdle. There's no more girdle. There's nothing holding it together. It's just, there's no restraint. There's nothing holding anything back. Tarshish is free. You're no longer subject to Tyre. Verse 11, the Lord has stretched out his hand over the sea. He has shaken the kingdoms. Adonai has given a commandment concerning Canaan to destroy its strongholds. Right? So this is Canaan speaking, Tyre is on the coast there of Canaan, and so its strongholds are being destroyed. Tyre is not what you thought it was. Your safety net, their strength that everybody glorified, it's not what they thought it was. It's the Lord who is giving the command here. Verse 12, it says, he said, you will exult no more, O crushed virgin daughter of Sidon. Arise, cross over to Cyprus. Even there you'll have no rest. Right? So now there's 4 different things that we see here. He says, first of all, there's a loss of reveling. You're not going to rejoice anymore. There's a loss of peace and purity. You've been crushed. You've been violated your innocence has been violated. It's gone, exploited. And now you're no longer, you've got to leave. You've lost your tenure here. You have to leave here. And you got to cross over. You're exiled. Go to the island. Go to Cyprus. Right? So, and then there's a loss of rest. Right? You're not even there. Even in your exile, there's not any rest there. Even there, you'll have no rest. He says, look, lest you think there's another escape. You go, well, I don't want to go to Cyprus. He goes, I don't want to go west to Cyprus. Let's look back east. He goes, okay, look, the land of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, this is the people who no longer exist. Assyria set it up for desert animals. They set up their siege towers. They stripped its palaces. They made it a ruin. If you think you can escape, you're invited to contemplate the opposite side in the east, what this all opened up with. Look at Babylon, right? There's nowhere to run to. Verse 14, wail, you ships of Tarshish, for your stronghold is destroyed. The thing, your safety harbor is gone. There's lament. There's no place for you to park. There's no place for you to do your trade. Verse 15, then it will come about in that day that Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, like the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre just as in the song of the prostitute. So here you get, what's this 70 years, right? So you have this, well, how does this relate to, like, Judah was put in captivity for 70 years, and so now Tyre will also be forgotten for 70 years. And so that 70 years may be an idiom in the day as well to kind of reflect 70 years that would stand for a fullness or a completeness. But it uses the language like the days of one king. Well, that doesn't mean that 70 years is how long a king typically serves. It basically says, in the same way that you would count the days of a king, like you're going to count it accurately, well, this is going to be like the span of a king's life. This is a precise number. You're going to be, rather than symbolically, that it's going to be 70 years, just like we saw in earlier oracles where it was like that of a hired worker, or 3 years or 1 year. So every day of 70 years will be recorded, crossed off until the stated time is fulfilled. Um, and then he goes on to say, um, your song will be, it will happen to Tyre just as the song of the prostitute. And there's a connection that's made between, of course, prostitution and merchants, this selling, and the selling in one sense of yourself, whatever it takes to get a profit. What will you give up to get a profit? And so that kind of prostitution, that kind of bad trade, just for gold, just to stack up piles of gold and silver. It says you're going to be singing like the prophet, or like the prostitute. Verse 16 gives us this song. Take a harp, stroll about the city, forgotten harlot. Skillfully play many songs so you may be remembered. Right? So this is sort of like it's got this cadence that's almost like a little ditty kind of and it seems to paint Tyre as one who was once a very popular prostitute. But now you're old and you're forgotten, and no one's coming after you. No one's trying to make a trade with you. And so it's like, well, you got to think up some new music, so that people will remember you or look your way, or, build some new clientele. Well, how are you going to return to what you were? Verse 17 says, then it will come about after the end of 70 years that Adonai will take note of Tyre, and she will return to her trade and will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Right? So first of all, it says the Lord will return to her, which makes it plain that the Lord restores Tyre. This is language that's used of Israel. If Tyre is to regain her place, it'll only be through God's grace. But what's confusing is, okay, well, she's going to prostitute herself again. Like, God delivered her from destruction, and she's going to prostitute herself again. And why is that? Well, just because the Lord has delivered her doesn't mean that she's going to respond positively. Many people have experienced God's hand of judgment, promised to do things differently, but when deliverance came, they reverted to their old ways, and that could be being said of Tyre. That may be what's happening here. But she goes back to what she had been doing. And yet, verse 18 says, yet her profit and her wages will be set apart to Adonai. They will not be stored up or hoarded, for her profit will be for those who dwell in the presence of Adonai as ample food and as fine clothing. So this is an interesting closing word that is a word of restoration, and it's a word to say, what? So stop trusting in Babylon, Egypt, Moab, Edom, Philistia, and stop trusting in the wealth. So, you're going to look to the wealth of Tyre? It says, hey, people of God, don't envy Tyre for her great wealth. Ultimately, everything that she possesses, however she comes about it, is going to come to the people of God. God will provide for his people. It'll be enjoyed by his people. Right? So Judah, God's people must not prostitute themselves to the nations, make a trade. Well, which is what they did. All that we have, you open up the temple treasuries to the king of Babylon. But the people of God should be true to the Lord and stop prostituting itself with the powers of this world. Stop selling short what God called us to be, so that we get proximity to power, so that we get proximity to wealth, so that we can have the wealth just like the others. We deem what greatness is and what power is by what the world deems it as. We're not to be defined by what the world defines as greatness and goodness, and yet to continue to prostitute ourselves for the acceptance of the kingdoms of this world is exactly what the Lord's saying. Stop it. Trust in me. Depend on me. The thing, it looks like that they're a security net, that this alliance is a safe harbor, and it will be gone because I am Lord of all the earth. Right? So why are you looking there? So I want to kind of wrap this up as you have Babylon at the eastern edge. It opens with, and it closes here with Tyre on the western edge. And so there's such a similarity between what we've just read here in Isaiah 23 and what we read in Revelation 18. Revelation 18, of course, opens up with talking about, O Babylon. And then it rolls into something that sounds like what we just read. Revelation 18, the end of verse 10 says, standing far off, or because of the terror of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, O great city, O Babylon the mighty city, for in a single hour your judgment has come. Verse 11, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, because no one buys their merchandise anymore. Shipments of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, all kinds of citron wood, all kinds of ivory products, all kinds of products made of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, and frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, and wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, and chariots, and slaves, that is, human souls. The fruit of your soul's desire is gone from you, and all the expensive and beautiful things are lost to you. Never again will people find them. Verse 15, the merchants of these things who became rich from her shall stand far off for fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, Alas, alas, O great city, clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in a single hour so much wealth has been ruined. And every ship captain and passenger, sailors, and all who make their living at sea stood at a distance and were crying out, seeing the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads and were crying out, weeping and mourning. Alas, alas, O great city. In her all who had ships at sea grew rich from her wealth, for in a single hour she has been ruined. Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you, Kedoshim, emissaries and prophets, for God has judged her condemnation of you. Right? So why are you going to put your hope in her? You're going to keep looking to all of these things that you're supposed to be leading them to him. Because in the end, the systems of this world, the kingdoms of this world, everything that looks so dependable is going to be nothing. Then a mighty angel picked up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So shall Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence, never to be found again. And the sounds of harpists and musicians, flautists and trumpeters shall never be heard in you again. And the craftsman of any craft shall never be found in you again, and the sound of a mill shall never be heard in you again, and the light of a lamp shall never shine in you again, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall never be heard in you again, for your businessmen were the tycoons of the world, for all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her was found the blood of the prophets in Kedoshim, and all those slaughtered on the earth. Those who stood, the kingdoms of this world, want to kill those in the kingdom of God. And when they embrace, when we look the same as them, then I don't know that we become numbered among the prophets and the Kedoshim. So Babylon's greatness was in her glory, her achievements, her accomplishments, her sophistication and culture. And Tyre, right? It's about all her wealth. So basically, between Babylon and Tyre, why are you trusting in any of it? Right? That's what Isaiah is saying. Don't trust the nations of the world. Why are you trusting in the glory of the nations? The glory of the nations is nothing. The scheming of the nations equals nothing. The wisdom of the nations in chapters 19-20 equals nothing. And since the vision of this nation, he says, equals nothing, and since the wealth of the nations in chapter 23 equals nothing, then the question is, why trust the nations? And the answer is clear. There's no reason to do so. Stop putting our safety and our security in the kingdoms of this world, in the systems of this world. Well, you got to do, hey, this is the real world, we're told. This is the real world. This is the way it works. This is the way the levers of power are pulled here. And so, hey, listen, we can't, you got to have faith, but I know we got to have faith, but look, this is the real world. We have to make compromises about how, if we want to see things done for the kingdom of God. No. Our trust is not in the things of this world, in the ways of this world, but in him and him alone. Amen? All right, well. Let me say hello to anybody that I missed. All right, good evening to Phil. And we'll be praying, I see that, praying for Lorraine, for Phil and Lorraine. Good evening to Charlene. How you doing, Charlene? And it's good to see you on here. And again, to the Eddies, to Lauren and Mike and David and Levi and Valor and Haven and Everett. And let's see. And Eileen. Good evening to Eileen as well. All right. Anyway, powerful passage in Isaiah 23. All right. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful evening.